Welcome back, everybody, for another campaign diary. Unfortunately, this one is going to be once again fairly rapid. You might be a little, I don't know, if for those of you who might be annoyed with it, I'll simply say this to my defense, that if you are unaware, I'm currently a college student, and as we are getting close to the end of the semester, my teachers have decided to start ramping up the difficulty and the work of the load of homework. As such, my time is drastically limited, and so that means, one, I can't take as much time mostly editing these things. I know that seems like, oh well, it probably takes like an hour or two to edit, but that's an hour or two that I could be working on homework. And right now, especially this week, is really packed. And here I am, I'm filming this episode here on Monday, and I'm releasing it Thursday morning, and so I want to just get it done as quickly as possible. So let's get straight down to business. When last we left our heroes, they had been working their way through the lower reaches. They had fought the Fomorans, they had run into the drow patrol with a couple prisoners. We met our new party member, Gray, and the dwarf took off. And Gray was, of course, Sam's new character, and he now plays both Illisphere and Gray at the same time, which, so far, he did alright on that first combat, and this was going to be his first real chance to see could he run two characters well. So, having defeated the drow, and if you looked at the map, you would see that the party was right there, just about right, kind of the right at Dythilith Keep. When they started up, I explained, as you guys continue down to the caverns, they branch off into several small little tunnels. And what it was is there was this little kind of web of tunnels right before Dythilith Keep. And the party said, alright, and they're like, okay, we're going to go down left. And they kind of worked their way through us, it bends around, splits off into two more tunnels. And they'd say, okay, we're going to go right. Okay, they go right. And I explained there. And I worked them, slowly they managed to work their way through. And a couple times they actually tried using some survival checks to see, okay, can we maybe sense some wind? Can we maybe hear some sounds in the distance? Could we maybe get a feel, maybe with an insight check? And they tried a couple times and met with fairly limited success, mostly due to just some poor rolls. But it wasn't supposed to be a big thing. It was mostly I had done this, and I was going to I had a couple Drider patrols, just like, 2 or 3 Driders together, kind of hanging out in various spots in this little web of tunnels. However, I took those out, mostly because I felt that there had been a lot of combat, especially with last session being basically just 2 giant combats. I didn't want there to focus so much on that here, especially kicking off this session. So eventually they found their way through this huge comb, and they come out into this large cavern. I described it, the cavern opens up, and all of a sudden you're in this massive hole in the ground, basically, and most of it is dominated by this black structure in the far side. It's this, and I described, there's this massive black keep, that's Dythilith Keep, and you can see, and there's also a tower next to it. There's an archway while the cavern floor, kind of goes towards it, and then part of it drops away next to the tower and comes into the keep. So basically, there's a walkway underneath the arch, so you can continue deeper into the tunnels below, but you have to basically pass this keep, and if you do, you're subject to basically take fire from the archway, which has a bridge, which is basically just a bridge, and the tower and the keep itself. And at this point, I was hoping Sam would remember the fact that I told him that Gray, having escaped from Dythilith Keep and then was recaptured, that Gray knew some things about the keep and that he could roll a history check, and that would provide some insight into how to best to breach this keep. And I admit I had a secret passageway the party could use that would get them really close to the dungeon of the keep, therefore cutting out a lot of stuff. However, Sam did try to roll, but it wasn't until much later they get there, and immediately they're like, alright, we're just going to go approach this bridge. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know if they thought that this wasn't the keep, because I felt I made it pretty obvious that this was Dythilith Keep. And they're like, no, we're just gonna go in. We're gonna head towards this walkway. And I'm like, all right, you guys walk in. And of course, they're a large group. We had all 6 people here, all 6 players here. So that's 7 people, 7 player characters plus 2 NPCs. Gets to be a fairly large group. At which point I said, all right, so your huge party of 9 is walking down there. They didn't say they were trying to be stealthy. So I basically sat there. I was like, all right. And I knew there were patrols, there were a couple drow on this bridge over there, and I just said, what? A huge volley of arrows come at you guys. And I said, everyone gets about, 3 arrows shot at them. And I had to roll 27 dice. Fortunately, what I had is I have a I have 3 sets of dice. I got had just my 3d20, so I just rolled them 9 times, and that wasn't too awful. It really wasn't that bad at all. And I just, rolled some quick dice, and I just rolled generic dice, 1 set of damage. I rolled a single d8, and I said, okay, depending on how many attacks people took, you multiply that by 3, plus like the 4 dexterity from the drow. So, everyone took I think I rolled like a 5, so it's like 9, 18, or 27 damage, depending on how many hits you got. People took a bunch of damage. They're like, oh yeah, that's kind of stupid. And I'm like, well, they know you're here. And they're kind of like, oh crap. When I had planned this, I'd written out this and drawn out Dythilith Keep, I was expecting them to be trying to be a little more stealthy. Maybe try and sneak around, see if there's a way they can get in. So maybe send somebody to scout. Be a lot more stealthy and try and sneak their way into the keep before maybe going guns blazing. No, they're just walked right up, and as a result, they're kind of like, okay. And I was caught off guard. I was expecting that, so therefore I hadn't really planned a ton on what exactly would happen if they are discovered out in the open. I figured, if they're discovered inside the keep itself, okay, a bunch of drow will start showing up. Well, now the drow know they're here. And so the party's like, well, we go straight for the front door. And sure enough, there's a front gate. And I said, okay, you go in, and, it's kind of down a slot, like, you have to go into this little, not hallway, but kind of, this slot into the keep before there's a door. And they're like, okay, we all rush in. It's like, well, you hear like a cranking of, the cranky of metal, and a portcullis drops behind you guys. And they're like, oh, well, now we're trapped. So let's break down the door. And so, of course, they sent Braden, Scavis, the half-orc barbarian, to break it down with Executioner. And he's like, okay. I go and I slam my axe into the ground. I was like, okay, he rolls attack. He rolls some damage. I said, okay, and I noted that, big, thick wooden doors are going to take a beating. And I'm like, all right, roll another strength check. And he's like, what? I was like, roll a strength check. He's like, okay. And he rolls like a total of a 13. I was like, well, you're stuck. Your axe is stuck to the wood. And he's like, what? I was like, for those of you who rolled good perception checks, you'll notice that there is kind of a web design on these doors. And what it is these doors had kind of a web magic on them. So that the idea was anyone who tries to break into them is going to get whatever it is stuck on the door. And so therefore, it's a lot harder to hit the door again if your axe or your siege weapon or whatever it be is stuck to this door. And meanwhile, I also had slits in this little slot, and where there were a couple drow on the inside also shooting at. So as the party is trying to free Braden and also bang on the door themselves and kind of break it down, they're also taking damage every round from I think I had 6 drow firing in at them, each one getting 2 shots. So again, 12 shots going off, and people took damage. And it only took them about a round. I think they only took them 1 round. There was kind of an initiative, but I really didn't they were kind of in combat, but I never sent them into actual initiative. I just said, okay, you guys do awesome stuff. Okay, the arrows, you guys kind of take an arm volley. I roll a bunch of dice. You guys take more damage. All right, there we go. And finally, they did, after really kind of about 1 round or so, they did break in the door. And at which point, they're now kind of in this little entry hall that, comes out and is where you can get in and you can get to the side. So, of course, all the drow who had been firing them come around and go to attack them, at which point we did actually roll an initiative. Kind of said, okay, we're now a little more formal. Here's initiative. Okay. And they dispatched these 6 drow pretty easily. And I used fairly low-level drow because I wanted to be kind of common soldiers. And now, of course, they had to get through another door, but they're like, Sonia's like, I will search the bodies. And she found a key, so she's like, great. So she was able to unlock the door rather than having to break it down. So now they were in the keep, but I said, you guys have dispatched these drow, but the rest of the keep knows you're still here, and there's going to be reinforcements coming. So they're like, crap. So they rush into kind of this, and I say, there's like a main corridor, and it splits off, and I describe, all the inner workings, kind of what they could see of the design of the keep so far, which is basically a large corridor and a couple that would sprout it off, including one right next to them, and another one like the opposite direction. And what they did is Sam's Illisphere has a hawk familiar, and so he sent it down as a scout, which I thought was clever. And there we go. I was like, okay, now you guys are being sneaky. You guys are kind of doing this right. Right, but I think as a DM, you always have an expectation of what's going to happen during your session, what happens when you throw this challenge at them. You have some expectations, so I used the hawk. I was like, there we go, kind of following my expectations a little bit more. And he got him around, and as he did it, I explained things to them, and he flies all the way down the corridor. I was like, okay, you see a bunch of drow kind of coming. He's like, okay, I fly back as fast as I can. Oh, I'm going to fly down one of these side corridors. And they come across, he basically enters what's the barracks. And so there's a bunch of drow, so his hawk familiar actually had to survive a couple hits from drow. Unfortunately, the drow rolled, the 3 drow it ran into all rolled fairly poorly, so it didn't actually hit, because a familiar only has like a couple hit points. I think it technically only has like 1 hit point, his hawk familiar does. But he brought it back, and they're like, okay, we can't go that way. We have drow coming down this main hallway from the top level, from a staircase. Okay, they're like, let's book to the side. And I was like, hey, we're going to try and be stealthy so that way they don't know we're coming down this way. Now, of course, when you have a party of 9, some of which are in very heavy armor, someone is eventually going to fail a stealth check. So what I then did is, then what they did also, something else I thought was very clever, is Danny used his thaumaturgy to create sounds of the party running down another corridor in the opposite direction. Oh, that's kind of fooling. So when I had so what I did is I had the drow, I think I rolled 40 20s for the kind of the drow party kind of coming down the large hallway. And it was, but they would get disadvantages. I rolled 4, but it was kind of, 2 sets of 2. So, okay, and the first one, failed, and the second kind of pair also failed. So they thought they fell for the trick, and so they went down this other corridor where they had created this thaumaturgy effect. Now, fortunately for the party, they're kind of holed up in this small hallway, and there's a staircase. There's actually a large staircase right kind of next to them, and they're trying to figure out, okay, let's go downstairs, because that makes the most sense, because dungeons are usually in the lower levels. So they do that. They go downstairs, and at this point they enter, another room, another small room in a corridor, and this is where Gray starts rolling some more history checks, and he actually now starts to succeed. And I say, I explain, you kind of remember, this kind of seems fairly familiar. You remember kind of coming down the far end of that corridor, but taking a left instead of coming down straight. And so it's like, okay, so we need to go that way. So, yep, sure enough, they go that way, and it gets them kind of into and they get into the area of the general area of the jail, and at which point things started to pick up a little more momentum. Now they weren't being chased, and I figured, these guys are on alert, but they're not like, roaming around. They're just kind of, making sure they're paying attention. And they did their best to try and pick off, they come into this room at the end of this corridor, which is kind of the guard's room, if you will, for the jail. And there's a door that's got the jails, that leads to the actual jail cells, and there's another door that's to the warden's office and such. And at this point, they then have to face a couple more drow who were guarding there. They have, the big warden who's kind of, big for a drow, but he's sitting at a table, and they tried to pick him off from afar, which they did pretty successfully, considering the fact that you have people like Danny, Hazel, and Sam who can all do really well at range. But so they do that, and at that point now they're like, okay, now we have a key, we're able to get into the jail. And once again, they're into the jail, and there's kind of, it's a corridor, and then there's 2 long things that extend from that main one that has all the cells. And here they tried to, I had guards strategically placed, like, there's one at there's 2 in the main corridor, all facing down, these little side wings that have the actual cells, and at the end of each wing is another drow that's watching them. That way, if any drow goes down, one drow will see him. And so they were like, okay, so they tried to use a little more thaumaturgy, and what they did is they left all the big, heavy guys back in the guard room, and they sent the sneakier guys, such as Sam. I think they sent Sam, Danny, and I think Esther went along, and Sonia went along, but most of their heavier guys they left back. And they did a fairly good job trying to draw them, but it didn't work perfectly, and so pretty quickly they come back into initiative, and they dispatched these guards also fairly quickly, and so now they're in the jail cells. Now they're free. I won't say free, but now they're kind of at their objective. They're like, okay, Rasalaax is in here somewhere. And pretty quickly they go and they find him. And at this point, we actually ran out of time. We were at the end of our session. The stuff early on where they were kind of getting into the keep had taken a lot of time, because I also kind of had to go with things. But now they had found Rasalaax, which was like, half of the reason they're here. Now they needed to find the hammer. But they're like, okay, now we have the big one. And this was also great for them, because they realized we have Rasalaax, which means Egret, when we get back to Tet, will now give us the boat to get back to our home continent. And I know a lot of the party members were kind of like, this is nice, because now we're able to finally get out of Keurig, finally get home, finally take on Fitzherbert. Let's end this once and for all. Of course, now they're deep in the middle of this place, of this keep, which is on high alert and knows they're here and is searching for them. And so now they have to fight their way through this, even after they get Rasalaax. So next week, you'll find out how that goes. They've already played this much. I'm still kind of catching up with campaign diaries, and we're actually getting fairly close to where they are now. We're almost caught up. At which point, I'm not quite sure what I'll do when the campaign diaries catch up to the actual campaign itself. So until then, we'll see how things go. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for putting up with my little more rapid pace talking. I made sure to write some notes down before I did this. That way I could have a general idea of what I wanted to say, and I think it worked pretty well, and I think I might do this more often. Write notes and then just rapid fire. Minimizes my editing time. Allows me to kind of do what I had originally intended for this to be a little more rapid fire, but also give some semblance of thought and some semblance of organization to these things, so it's not just a giant rant on my part. Anyway, again, thanks for tuning in, guys. Hopefully my homework load decreases and I can put more time into this. Not that I put a ton of time. Admittedly, it's supposed to be kind of just a quick for fun thing, but a little more time. As always, see you guys next time. Stay cool.